Let's continue to hymn number 289. The Savior is Waiting, 289.
This is our opening song, so I would ask everyone to please stand.
Have a quick word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for another wonderful Sabbath day that we are able to be here together, this church family, to hear the message of the one you have decided to speak for us, Lord. May your word be sent through her, and that we may all learn something to put in our hearts. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Good afternoon. Let's see. Do you guys know? Okay, good. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, good afternoon. Wasn't that a wonderful lunch and beautiful music? Wonderful. Praise God. So let's talk. Let's continue talking. Oh, first, I want to ask, is there anyone here who wasn't here this morning? Come on, raise your hand, please. I have some slides in here that I also had in this morning's presentation, and I didn't want to bore you and repeat myself. But if there's someone here who wasn't here this morning, I'm happy to go over them. So, okay, thank you for that. Thank you. So let's talk about this. So, it's not working. Oh, wait, I got to turn it on. That's cool. Helps to turn it on. Have a blonde moment every once in a while. So this isn't financial advice. This is just educational purposes only. I always have to say that because I trade the markets and I'm in the financial markets, but I'm not a financial advisor. And I can't possibly tell you what to do with your 401k. And people ask me that all the time. I can't. I'm not licensed to, and you don't want me to tell you. What I will tell you, happily, cheerfully tell you, to lay up your treasures in heaven, because where your heart is, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So please lay up your treasures in heaven. I don't fear for the future. You know what? I had a wonderful opportunity to witness when I was at work. There was a guy who really doesn't, I work with him, but he doesn't research these things like I research these things. So I was telling him stuff that President Trump's doing, the central banks are doing, that he wasn't really aware of. And I showed him how this is working out in Bible prophecy and gave him like sort of a mini, version of what I'm telling you today. And he stopped and he was just kind of taken aback. And then he came back and he's like, I just have to ask you, he's like, how much do you take of this on a personal level? Do you let any of this get to you? Are you ever afraid for any of this? And I just said, I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of any of this, because I said, I don't know what you believe, but I know Jesus, and I'm a Christian, and I don't worry about any of this, because God's going to provide for his people. I said, there's so many ways that God can provide for us. It doesn't matter if these things happen. And they will happen, but it doesn't matter, because Jesus will take care of us. So it was a wonderful opportunity to witness in that moment, and I'm thankful that God let me do that. But so please don't worry about any of these things, and I can't advise you what to do with your 401k, and it's not financial advice. It's just, I want to share these things with you, because we can see the architecture being built in real time on how Bible prophecy will play out, and how Satan's no buy, no sell policy will be enforced. So again, I'm an attorney. I practiced law for 20 years, and now I trade the financial markets, and I'm a participant in the financial markets, and I'm only seeing these things because I'm in the financial markets. If I was still practicing law, I believe that God led me into the financial markets to see these things and be able to share them. Because if I was still practicing law, I wouldn't see any of these things. I wasn't looking at the central banks. I wasn't looking at what's going to move the market when I was practicing law. So I think it's a blessing that God let me see these things so that I can share them with other people. And my encouragement is that now is the time to prepare. Now is the time to awaken and prepare. Let's not be sleeping Adventists, but let's just understand the times that we're living in. And Jesus really is coming soon. So I'll share that with you. And, I'm here because Sister White says we are Christ's ambassadors. We're watchmen unto the house of Israel, to see the dangers that await souls, to give them warning. And she says also in the Review and Herald, the Lord is soon coming. The watchmen on the walls of Zion are called upon to awake to their God-given responsibility. Many of them are in the stupor of insensibility. God calls for watchmen who in the power of the Spirit will give to the world a message. Watchmen who will proclaim the time of night. He calls for watchmen who will arouse men and women from their lethargy, lest they sleep the sleep of death. And we don't want to see anyone be lost. Also, my point is, if you get anything from this today, do not become lost because you're too attached to your money or your things. That's another one of my points, is that we have to be willing to let these things go, because there is a better thing waiting for us. There's a life with God and with Jesus, and a heaven awaiting us. God's preparing a place for us. Please don't be lost because you're too tied to your money or your things. The people who will be lost, they're going to be too tied to their money or their things. The brethren among us who, leave the church or are going to leave the church, it's because they're too tied to their money or their things that they could be lost. So I don't want to see anyone be lost if they're too tied to their money or their things. And I find if I present these things that people can wrap their minds around them, and we can be better prepared to help ourselves, through prayer and seeking God and his comfort and his grace, and we can help those around us as well. We can be a comfort and a blessing to those around us if we wrap our minds around this. So let's just look very quickly at the scripture reading from this morning. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. That's Satan's buy, no sell policy in Revelation 13:17. And I'm going to show you the architecture that they're building of how this can happen. I couldn't see it like I told you this morning, when I was 16 years old, sitting in church with my family, raised Adventist, I could not see how this would happen. And I didn't believe, I strayed away from the church because if I couldn't believe this, I really couldn't believe anything else. And I just, decided to do my own thing in college and law school and the rest of my life until the pandemic hit, and I realized, oh, the Constitution really doesn't mean much at all, apparently. So, this is what got to me. This is, if you have any friends or family that are out of the church or that have wandered away, please don't stop praying for them, because God knows the exact issue that will touch your heart. There's something out, this was it for me, but God knows how to bring them back. He knows the timing and the right issue that will strike the chord in them and lead them back to him by God's grace. So, in Testimonies of the Church, we saw this morning, the time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth prohibiting men to buy or sell of any man, save that he hath the mark of the beast. And she also says in the Desire of Ages, in the last great conflict of the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. Because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers, they will be forbidden to buy or sell. It will finally be decreed that they shall be put to death. So we really need to wrap our heads around this. If we can't buy or sell, praise God. Praise God that we are on the right side of this great controversy. If we lose our stuff, praise God. Rejoice in all things, because you know what? We are on the right side of this great controversy, and there's so much better for us waiting that Christ is preparing for us. So, and God promises that he that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before the angels. So there is something waiting for those who overcome the beast and the mark in his image. So let's talk about CBDC in the context of Satan's no buy, no sell policy. So what is central bank digital currency? I described this morning. It is, and I feel like here in the West, we have a very hard time imagining how our freedoms could be curtailed. We don't know that, because we have this perception of being free. We're not as free as we think we are at times. But we have this perception of being able to do what we want with our money. And there's going to be a time when that's not so. So central bank digital currency is fully programmable, and that's the key, the programmability. Fully traceable digital currency that is centralized and distributed by a government or its central bank. And because it's centralized to one authority, that authority that programs it fully controls it and can program it any way it wishes to constrain the user in any way it wishes to, and to elicit whatever behavior it wants from the user. So that means that the government can surveil all financial transactions in real time and control when, where, and upon what you can spend the currency. And this is why it's a threat to liberty, because the government would have, and these words I will show you do not come from me. These words come from the Bank of International Settlements General Manager, Augustine Carson. So the government would have the authority to decide and the power to enforce how you may or may not spend the CBDC. And like I said, they're designed to financially constrain the user in any way the government wants and to elicit whatever behavior it wants from the user. And this is Augustine Carstens, and this is where he said it. And you can find this video on YouTube, on Rumble. In October 2020, he was describing the difference between cash and digital currency. And he was saying, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. There is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who is using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a $1,000 bill today. The key difference with CBDC is that the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of the expression of central bank liability, and will have the technology to enforce that. And that's coming right from the Bank for International Settlements General Manager, Augustin Carstens. And what he means by that is when a central bank issues CBDC to you in your digital wallet, it is a liability on the central bank. So when he says the central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability, what he's saying is that when the central bank issues CBDC to an individual, they can control how they can use it. And they have the power to enforce that with technology. That's coming straight from the Bank of International Settlements, the central bank above all the central banks, right out of the horse's mouth. So I am not making any of this up. This is not coming from me. I will show you this central banker and other central bankers are telling you the exact same thing. They're telling you the truth. In brief moments, they tell you the truth of the power of CBDC. So I've explained this morning, but I'll explain it again. With the CBDC, the government can see all your transactions in real time and tax you instantly. They can mandate that any and all medical procedures can be taken. And they'll have the ability to turn off your money if you don't comply. They can turn off your money if they don't like what you post on social media or your religious practices or really anything. If you go anything against the mainstream narrative, they'll be able to turn off your money. And the CBDC can be programmed to expire within 30 days so that you can't save it. You would have to convert it to goods before it evaporates. And they actually like that because it's a feature that allows them to control the money supply that's out there. So they can control it that much more efficiently if it can be programmed to expire. Your money can be programmed so they can't be used to purchase certain goods, foods, or services. So if they were worried about the carbon footprint score that you have and trying to, prevent climate change and all that kind of stuff, they can control what you can spend your stuff on. If they think you've taken too many flights or you've traveled too much or you've done anything else that has a large carbon footprint score, they could, curtail your spending on those types of things that have a large carbon footprint score. They can really elicit whatever behavior from you they want with a CBDC. And the central bank could institute negative interest rates, which means a portion of your money would be deducted every month instead of having money come into your account every month with positive interest rates. And this isn't unheard of because Japan had a negative interest rate policy for quite a long time, from 2016 to the end of 2023. They had a negative interest rate policy. This is another central banker who's telling us basically the same thing, Neil Kashkari. He basically said in this interview where he was asked about CBDC, what does he think about it? And he basically said it doesn't solve any actual problems other than enable central bankers to monitor all transactions, impose negative interest rates, and deduct taxes directly from your accounts in real time. It doesn't add anything novel to the market in terms of benefits for consumers. And this is what he said. These are the exact words. He said, I keep asking anybody at the Fed or outside the Fed to explain to me what problem this is solving. He said, I can send anybody in this room $5 with Venmo right now. And there was laughter in the background. He says, right? No, seriously. So what is it that a CBDC could do that Venmo can't do? And all I get is a bunch of hand waving. Well, China's doing it. Well, I can see why China would do it. If they want to monitor every one of your transactions, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. If you want to impose negative interest rates, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. And if you want to directly tax customer accounts, you could do that with a central bank digital currency. You can't do that with Venmo. So I get why China would be interested, but why would the American people be for that? And the thing is, the American people wouldn't be for that if they understood it. And in those countries where central bank digital currency is launched, like Nigeria and the Caribbean countries, it's such low adoption. Like, people don't want to use it. They just have no interest in having the government be able to control their behavior. This is a statement from IMF Deputy Managing Director Bo Li. He's a former deputy government of the People's Bank of China, and he was talking about the programmability of money at an IMF panel in 2023. And he said, financial inclusion is what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program to create smart contracts to allow targeted policy functions, for example, welfare payment, for example, consumption coupon, for example, food stamp, By programming CBDC, those monies can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of people can use this money, can be utilized. For example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support, and that way they can also improve financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is one of the buzzwords they use as a benefit of this, but what it means is like including you in the control grid is what it actually means in reality. And that's through this programmability and forcing this on people. They're including them in the control grid. And they can, with a line of code, they can dictate what you can or cannot buy based on what they want. This is an interview that was given by Professor Richard Werner. He was recently interviewed on Tucker Carlson's network, and it was a really great show. I would watch that as well. He has a lot of interesting things to say. But he was interviewed for this documentary about CBDC called CBDC, The End of Money. And this was on August 31st, 2024. And he's a professor of banking and economics. He's a lecturer at the University of Oxford. He's the author of the book Princes of the Yen. He's the father of the quantitative easing monetary concept that our central bank and other central banks have used. And he's an expert on central banks and CBDCs. And what he says, I include a lot of his comments because I still feel like we don't really understand how they can control us with these things until you actually hear somebody talk about it. And his comments are so illustrative of what they could do with CBDC. And he says CBDCs are presented as if it's something brand new, when the reality is that we've been using BDCs, bank digital currencies, for many decades. You know, there's nothing new about that, and it works well. Bank digital currencies, that's our current system. So the only difference is the central aspect. And who's pushing for this? Well, the central planners. It's the central bankers that are pushing for this, and specifically the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank above all the central banks. They're pushing for every country to have a central bank digital currency. And so what he says is actually right. I mean, how many people actually use cash, like green pieces of paper? Most people use their debit card or their credit card. It's really bank digital currency. It's all ones and zeros, basically. So very few people use cash. And he says, is there a need for it? No, there's absolutely no need for this, because the current financial system doesn't have any problems in terms of settlement and transactions, because you have choice. Once you introduce CBDCs, there's many risks and dangers of that, but one obvious one is that you're actually going to reduce choices, because for CBDCs to properly do their job from the perspective of the issuer, from the central banks, you need to get rid of the competition. You need to get rid of cash. That's actually a declared goal of CBDCs. You've got plenty of studies by central banks and other economists in favor of CBDCs arguing that we need to abolish cash and then introduce CBDCs, because then we can have negative interest rates. We can take money directly out of people's pockets. That's what Professor Werner had to say on this. And he says, quote, while you have cash, you can flee from the financial system and put your money in cash, and then they can't punish you with negative interest rates. That's why they want to abolish cash. But most of all, the really big dangers of CBDCs are the programmability, which is essentially, it's not even money. Your money becomes potential money, because it depends on a central planner to agree that you should now be allowed to spend this money in this location for this particular transaction and in this particular volume, if you want to do. But why should that be conditional? When they describe programmability, this is what it's all about. It's permissioned money. The central bank has to agree that you can spend that in that location for that particular item, for that particular thing. So he's absolutely right about that. And we don't really think about that. It's never really explained to you when somebody talks about CBDC. It really is permissioned money. And he says, quote, the push for CBDCs is the final step in a multi-decade program by central planners to increase their power over the people, over countries. This is the ultimate step because the powers of CBDCs are so extraordinary that, I mean, even the worst dictators in past centuries could only have dreamt of having such enormous power over the lives of so many people. And it's right, if you think about it. He's absolutely right. he says, quote, one counter argument against this would be to say, well, okay, it's a power tool for central planners, but surely they're too busy, and how could they ever plan and micromanage, 80 million people in Germany, or, all these millions of people? Well, that's where AI comes in, isn't it? In other words, it will be algorithms that will, for the most of the majority, control their spending in the future. The micromanaging decision will then be automated. That's even more dystopian. You have no right to appeal the algorithm because there's so many masses, you can't practically have an appeal process. You just won't be able to use your money for certain things, and there's nothing you can do. This is why it's the perfect tool for Satan's no buy, no sell policy, programmable money, programmable digital currency. And this is where you can find his interview on YouTube, and it's at Big Picture Watch, bigpicture.watch. So this is happening, and it's happening around the world. And in Brazil, when they were creating the pilot for the CBDC, they put out a section of their code for developers to look at and comment on. And one developer said, he looked at it and he said that Brazil's CBDC, the digital real, contains codes that would allow Brazil's central bank to, at will, freeze and unfreeze accounts, increase and decrease account balances, move currency from one address to another, and create or burn digital real from a specific address. So this is the type of control that the central bank would have in a CBDC. They could just freeze your balance, freeze your account whenever they want to, for whatever reason, increase or decrease your balances at will. He found this in their code when he analyzed the code. And it's very characteristic of any CBDC, really. So I want to show you that this is really a worldwide thing. And CBDCs are being explored, tested, and developed worldwide in some way, shape, or form. Each of the countries, most of the countries, are in various stages of development. To date, the countries that have launched their retail CBDC are Nigeria, Bahamas, Nigeria has e-Naira, Bahamas has a sand dollar, Antigua and Bermuda have Dcash, as well as other countries. They're part of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, I believe. And then there's the Jamdex in Jamaica. So those are the countries that have done that. And according to the Atlantic Council, the countries that are exploring this are about 134 countries and currency unions, representing about 98% of global GDP. So it's literally almost the entire world that's doing this. And I'll show you a map. This map is from the Atlantic Council. It's not quite as filled in as the cbdctracker.org map is. I think the cbdctracker.org is a little more accurate than Atlantic Council's, but this is the Atlantic Council's. This is both, and they only updated it as late as July 2025. cbdctracker.org is much more current. It's like September. They updated it in September. But this is both resale and wholesale CBDC. This is retail only from the Atlantic Council. And from cbdctracker.org, this is retail only, accurate up to September 2025. So it's really almost the entire world that's doing this. Almost every country is filled in there with a color showing they're in some form of development. They're in some research phase. Some are in proof of concepts in later phases. So you could take a look at that online. And so the CBDCs in the launch phase are like the Jamdex, the Sand Dollar, the e-Naira, the Dcash, and there's a bunch in the pilot stage as well. So, Jerome Powell, before Trump, got into office really, and, while he's been in office, he's been saying things like, you don't even have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about this at all. And I'll show you that. At the U.S. Senate Banking Committee meeting on March 7th, 2024, he said, if we're ever to do something like this, and we're a very long way from even thinking about it, we would do this through the banking system, Powell said. The last thing we would want with the Federal Reserve would be to have individual accounts for all Americans, or any Americans for that matter. So if you don't know Jerome Powell, he is the Fed chair. He is our central bank in the United States is the Federal Reserve, and he is the chair. So he's in charge of the Federal Reserve. And he keeps saying stuff like this. We're not even thinking about it. He's lying. He's not being truthful with you. And I'll show you that. So both the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank have stated if they will do a CBDC, that it would be a synthetic CBDC model, which means that the central bank doesn't issue it directly to consumer. There's a major bank in the middle there as the middleman. So they issue the CBDC to the bank, and then the bank issues it to you. So it would be like Chase or Wells Fargo or US Bank or something like that would be the major bank in between you and the Federal Reserve. And he said this in 2022 during an event hosted by the Bank of France. If we were to pursue a CBDC, it would at minimum have the following 4 characteristics. 1, it would be intermediated, meaning there would be a bank between you and the central bank. 2, privacy protected. 3rd, identity verified, so it would not be anonymous. There's no anonymity in the central bank digital currency system. With cash, you have anonymity. Nobody knows how you're spending your cash. But in CBDC or digital currency, there's no anonymity. They know exactly what you're spending it on and where you're spending it. So the European Central Bank also said this. They said this in November 2023 when they were entering their preparation phase. They will be out of the preparation phase in October of 2025, just next month. And they expect President Christine Lagarde, who you see here, she has said she expects a decision to be made at that point and she wants the decision to be that the European Central Bank will move forward with a CBDC at that time. So she said, and she said a lot of things in this report and in her statements, the ECB will have control. And she said that in the same press release, there would be limitations on the amount of digital euros that individuals or businesses may hold in their digital wallets. She said that. There's going to be limits as to how much you can hold. Page 12 of the summary report that was issued at the conclusion of the investigation stage said that holding limits were identified as an effective tool and therefore would be included in the design of a digital euro. So they're telling you there's going to be control. They're going to control how much you can have, and they will be able to control what you can spend it on, but they're not saying that yet. But it's obvious from the nature of CBDC and the code itself. She was, this is a video online. It went viral. Somebody pranked her. Somebody called her and pretended to be the president of the Ukraine and was talking to her about CBDC and digital euros. And she admitted during that call, she said, spending more than 1,000 euros is already illegal and puts you on the gray market. But she thinks it's dangerous to permit an individual to spend 300 or 400 euros in cash in total anonymity. And she blamed terrorism and this and that on it. She thinks it's dangerous for people to hold cash and be able to spend it on what they want, and they can't see what you're spending it on. So she's very much in favor of this, but it's a pretty funny video if you ever find it online. What do we have in the United States right now? We have FedNow. This was introduced in July 2023. It's an instant payment system that's operated by the Federal Reserve. So what it does is supports banks who want to offer fast payment services to their customers. It's really the groundwork for a CBDC, because in order to have a CBDC, you have to have a fast way of transmitting it and transferring money around. And this is sort of like the foundation on which it could be built. It's the fast payment system that would underlie that if the Federal Reserve were to issue a CBDC. But as of August 2025, there's not many participants. Only 1,434 banks and financial institutions are participating. When this came out, they said they wanted like 10,000 banks and financial institutions to participate. They don't have that many participants, and it's 2 years later. So it's really moving very slowly. And so Fed Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell also said during that testimony before the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, we're nowhere near recommending or letting alone adopting a central bank digital currency in any form. People don't need to worry about it. He keeps saying that. But the truth is that Project Hamilton has been going on since December 2022, since before that, actually. In December 2022, they reported that their processor they developed, the Open CBDC processor, it provides a code base that supports 1.84 million transactions per second and settlement in less than a second of most of those transactions. That is so much faster than the transactions that we have now. That's like an order of magnitude faster and greater than our current transactions right now. So their tests were extremely successful. And this thing is ready to go. It's just been sitting on the shelf waiting, ready to go. They could bring this out at any point. So they have it. Not only, he keeps saying, we're not even thinking about it. Not only are they thinking about it, they developed it and they tested it. So he's not really being very truthful with people. But he did say in answering Senator Cynthia Lummis that the Federal Reserve will not do it without congressional authorization. They will wait for Congress to tell them to do this. But it's ready to go in case they get an authorization from Congress to do this. How soon could Congress respond in a real or perceived crisis? Well, if we look back at our recent history, the COVID-19 pandemic, it only took them 2 months and 26 days after the pandemic was reported to the WHO that Congress passed the CARES Act and the PrEP Act. So our recent history shows us that Congress really could move very quickly if they needed to, if they were asked by Congress to. So also another development that happened is the SWIFT network. So the SWIFT network is a global financial messaging network that all the Western countries use. It connects over 11,000 banking and securities organizations and in more than 200 countries. And just in November 2022, it processed an average of 44.8 million messages a day through its network. So it's a huge global financial messaging and transfer system, the SWIFT network. And it's one way in which the United States is like punished other countries by not letting them be a part of SWIFT. You know, it's a real benefit if a country can be a part of SWIFT. And so keeping, you know, some of the countries we don't like out of SWIFT is a tool that the US has used against other countries. Well, SWIFT did some testing, and they've created a platform in their project, Connecting Digital Islands, in their report, the Sandbox Project, demonstrated that they said in 2024 that they were planning to launch a CBDC platform in 1 to 2 years, and they were ready. And they said that their platform could accommodate different countries' CBDCs, even if they were developed with different protocols and different types of technology. They could still accommodate it with a SWIFT network. That's pretty significant, that they're this close to launching a CBDC platform. And if different countries make their CBDC with different protocols or different technology, different code, they can still accommodate it at SWIFT. So they're ready to go. The Bank of International Settlements, they released a survey that 81%, central banks representing 81% of the world's population and 94% of global economic output responded, and they were in favor of they were working on a CBDC in some form or fashion, and this is their map. Their survey also had some questions about control, and about 50% they wanted to obligate merchants to accept it as an indication of control. They wanted limitations on balances and limitations on transactions, and embedded capital flow management measures were somewhat favored. Also, they favored programmable payments. So, I mean, they're just showing you how much they're in favor of these control measures. Catherine Austin Fitts spoke at Hillsdale College on November 11th, 2024, and she spoke about CBDC. And she said, "We don't have a financial problem. We have a secret governance system that is not transparent and is centralized and controlled." She said, "We're seeing new and potentially wonderful digital technology used to centralize control in area and after area in all aspects of our life. The problem is not so much with the tools themselves, but with the secret governance system and how they decide to use it." She said, "I believe there's only one way to stop the move to total central control, and that is by preventing control of our digital transactions, our financial transactions." She's very much in favor of using cash to try to slow down this mission creep toward digital currency. She encourages people to use cash as much as possible to provide friction against this. The problem, as she sees it, is digital money. That's the problem, because any digital money can be controlled. Even credit cards and stuff like that. They could exercise control if they wished with your credit cards. So she encourages people to use cash. And she said the going direct reset, the World Economic Forum calls it the greater reset. This is a completely different reset than what we have ever seen, and that's because we have an all-digital technology, an all-digital monetary system that gives you the ability to do something very radical. And she was talking about the Biden nominee for control of the digital currency who didn't get passed. She published a month before her nomination some article in Vanderbilt Law Review, and she said, the wonderful thing about central bank digital currency is inflation is no longer a problem. If you have inflation, you just freeze everybody's bank accounts. It doesn't really bode well for you if they want to control inflation by freezing everybody's bank accounts. But it was some indication of what some of these people think about central bank digital currency. And she said the important thing to understand about central bank digital currency and an all-digital financial system is that it's not a currency, it's a control grid. And that's something she's been demonstrating and saying and talking about repeatedly. It's that it's a control grid, it's not actually money. And she said the process to implement central bank digital currency around the world is being overseen by the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland. The Bank of International Settlements is owned by its members. The New York Fed, the Board of Governors are both shareholders in the BIS, and 63 of the top central banks are in the BIS, and they're running a process with a major partnership with the Federal Reserve to implement CBDCs, and they're prototyping around the world. So she's telling us that she's a central bank expert as well, and she's telling us that it's the Bank of International Settlements that's really trying to get all of the central banks around the world to implement this. She also gave an interview for this radio show, and she talked about CBDCs and the Unified Ledger, the Global Unified Ledger, in June of 2024. And she said, if you look at the people who are behind the central bankers who want and are pushing the CBDC system, they have no intention of being reasonable. And digital technology allows them to reset the economy and reset the governance and management system on planet Earth to a wholly new system. She said, you cannot fathom where these people want to go. She says, let's go back to the lockdowns. If I don't want you leaving your house, it's really easy to enforce this with CBDCs. I can simply say, your money won't work. You can shop online and you can have it delivered, but your money won't work outside of your home. You can't buy gas, you can't buy food, you can't travel, your money won't work because it's programmed. And the reality is, with AI and software, they can manage you one person at a time. So the rules that can be applied to you are totally different than the rules that can be applied to your wife. So with a social credit system, if your wife is behaving better than you know they will custom design the controls. And then she added, ultimately the entire system can be run from Basel, Switzerland, which is where the headquarters for the BIS are located, which can be run by Lockheed Martin and BlackRock. It's just like, this is how AI can be used in all of this to really micromanage every person. So when the Bible says that the beast, and in Ellen G. White's writing saying the beast can control all of the earth and those who dwell on the earth, this is how they can do it. They can do it through the reach of these digital currencies and through AI to do the managing. Our new Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, he said at his confirmation hearing, I see no reason for the U.S. to have a central bank digital currency. And this has been Trump's major thing. Trump did an amazing thing. Everybody told me, but Trump outlawed CBDCs. Yeah, okay, he did. He prohibited, through his executive order, he prohibited CBDC development, but at the same time, he also encouraged the development of dollar-backed stablecoins, which are just as bad as the CBDC, and even worse because they're a privatized CBDC. So his executive order seeks to promote in the United States leadership in digital assets and financial technology while protecting economic liberty, he says. It revokes all these policies and frameworks that were encouraging a CBDC in the prior administration. But it's also, he prohibited the development of a CBDC within the jurisdiction of the United States, but he also, he also is supporting the responsible growth and use of digital assets, blockchain technology, and related technologies across all sectors. And his executive order promotes and protects the sovereignty of the United States dollar, including through actions to promote the development and growth of lawful and legitimate dollar-backed stablecoins worldwide. So he's going all in on digital assets. And they've said, his administration has said that. The fact sheet for the GENIUS Act, which stands for the Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins. It was signed into law on July 18th, 2025. It basically provides a regulatory framework for the development of stablecoins and regulatory rules for stablecoin issuers as well. The fact sheet on the whitehouse.gov website says that all stablecoin issuers must possess the technical capability to seize, to freeze, or to burn payment stablecoins when legally required, and they must comply with lawful orders to do so. So that's telling you that the government is going to be exercising some sort of control if they wish to. That a stablecoin issuer is going to legally have to lawfully comply with their orders to either freeze your money or prevent you from being able to spend your money. Anytime they think that's required, these stablecoin issuers are going to have to respond to those orders and do what the government says, is basically what this says. So while President Trump says he's prohibiting a CBDC, this is a backdoor CBDC. You could think of it as a backdoor CBDC or a privatized CBDC, because the same dangers, the same problems with CBDC are present in a dollar-backed stablecoin. They're just as programmable, just as traceable, just as surveillable, and just as seizable as the CBDC is. It's just in the hands of a private issuer. And I like to think of it like, when I'm talking to people, you remember how during the pandemic there was all this censorship? You couldn't say anything that was against the mainstream narrative. If you did, your video was taken down by YouTube. Still, videos are being taken down by YouTube if it contradicts something. And Facebook, Twitter, all of these were censoring people who are challenging the mainstream narrative concerning the pandemic. Anyone coming up with alternate therapies was censored, was shut down during the pandemic. They could do the same thing with your money, with a dollar-backed stablecoin. And it's not, and the way it's privatized with private issuers of stablecoins, they don't have to comply with the First Amendment. They don't have to give you your First Amendment rights, just like the technology companies didn't have to give us our First Amendment rights during the pandemic. And we see from the release of the Twitter files that the White House was in direct communication with these social media companies, telling them to restrict speech around the narrative, the mainstream narrative. So in the same way, they can restrict your money even more easily with private issuers of programmable digital currency than if the government's doing it. If the government's doing it, you have some colorable argument saying, well, you can't do that to me because of the First Amendment and my expression of speech and blah, 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 blah. They don't have to worry about this if it's a private institution issuing this programmable digital currency. And that's why they like it. And the CEO of Tether basically admitted this. With Tether, he said, every action is online, every action is traceable, every asset can be seized, and every criminal can be caught. He's the CEO of the largest, most widely used dollar-backed stablecoin. And he's basically telling you, every action's online, everything's traceable, and we can seize your assets, we can seize your coin in any activity that is deemed illicit. So he's telling you that. It's basically a CBDC, just in a privatized form. And our U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, said this as well. He was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, which is a huge, heavily invested in Tether. They're a huge investor and supporter of Tether. And he also said at a Bitcoin conference last year, Tether will seize any amount of coin in illicit activity. Well, what's illicit? Whatever the government deems as illicit. So if the government issues these orders under the Genius Act for them to restrict this type of activity with the money, they'll do it. They'll seize your coin, they'll freeze your balance in anything the government deems as illicit or anything they want to stop. So they'll have the same sort of control that the government would have with a CBDC. It's just privatized. So I'll skip through some. These are just requires them to maintain reserves backing the stablecoin at a 1-to-1 value with the US dollar. And the reason why the way that they do this is they invest in US treasuries. And that's why this administration is all in on stablecoins, is because if you've heard anything about de-dollarization and other countries dumping US dollars, dumping US treasuries, and the administration is kind of concerned about that. And Trump has said before he was elected and since he's been elected, it would be like losing a major world war if the dollar were to lose its status as reserve currency throughout the world. He says, we will not let that happen. We cannot let that happen. And they're using stable coins to stop that from happening. Because while other countries are not buying our bonds and our treasuries, the stablecoin issuers are buying them at an increased rate. In fact, Tether is they're the 4th largest purchaser of treasuries right now and the 18th largest holder of US treasuries. They hold more treasuries than some countries do already, just to maintain that 1-to-1 reserve, 1-to-1 exchange status with the dollar. So the government is counting on them to pick up the slack in buying treasuries and keeping the dollar as the reserve status, the reserve currency throughout the world. So that's why they're going all in on this. That's one motivation for that. So this act is supposed to go into effect 18 months after the enactment of the act, which would be January 18th, 2027, or 120 days after the primary federal payment stablecoin regulators issue any final regulations implementing the act. So it's not really going into effect yet. But after this date, the issuers of payment stablecoins have to abide by the obligations in the act, meaning they have to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act, and they have to be able to have the capability to freeze and unfreeze your coin at any time. Just fast forward through this. So it just defines all of these things, basically, and it's kind of dry, but proponents of stablecoins, they argue that its benefits are faster settlement, cheaper transactions, cross-border payments and remittances, convenience, all these decentralization, they say, but it's not really that decentralized. Financial inclusion, these are the arguments for having a stablecoin, according to these people. So I showed you this quote from this morning from Catherine Austin Fitts. And she said something that I thought was really insightful because I didn't gather this right away when I was reading through the Genius Act. I was still thinking of it in terms of, okay, this is a US president who signed this legislation that's going to affect Americans. And I didn't see what she saw. And she said, as stablecoins get tested and tried, they realized, wow, instead of doing a national CBDC and letting countries around the world do national CBDCs, all reporting up to the Bank of International Settlements, this is a way to do a US CBDC that you can market to everybody on the planet instead of just Americans. And instead of just Americans being on the American CBDC, we can get 8 billion people around the globe on American CBDC. I didn't see that right away when I read through the Genius Act, and I was thinking about this until she said it, and she's absolutely right. So with not only is the US cementing the US dollar as a reserve currency of the world, they're making their CBDC available, their privatized CBDC available to everyone in the world. So when we read in the Bible that the second beast of Revelation will be able to reach and affect everyone who dwells on the earth, this is how they could reach and affect everyone who dwells on the earth. The US CBDC, a dollar-backed stablecoin, will reach everyone throughout. Anyone who has a smartphone will be able to buy a stablecoin and use stablecoins. Anyone around the world with a smartphone will be able to do it. So they really could market this to the entire world and eventually have control of everyone in the world. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to me. And not only that, she said, we'll be free of Congress, or relatively free of Congress, because instead of issuing it through the New York Fed, we'll just issue it through a variety of issuers, the lead ones being the owners of the New York Fed. And then she says, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So there's nothing good for us as far as dollar-backed stablecoins. President Trump, I'm not trying to pick on President Trump, but he did not save Americans from programmable money. He's legislating programmable money. He's pushing it forward. He said he prohibited a CBDC, but this is a backdoor CBDC, so he really didn't prohibit a CBDC. He didn't prohibit programmable money and the freedom to transact. That was not, he didn't do anything in terms of freedom to transact with us. And then she said, the genius of the Genius Act is that the US government gets the CBDC without the oversight and responsibilities. So with CBDC, the smaller countries around the world have been, they've been developing it, because the BIS and the World Bank and everyone is putting pressure on them to do so, but it's really expensive to get the software companies and the talent, the programming talent to create this code and to create all of these things. It's expensive. And so they don't have to create it. The stable coins are already created. They don't have to provide the cybersecurity so much. That's something you also have to worry about. If you're a central bank issuing CBDC, you've got to make sure that it's secure. Now it's on these privatized entities to make sure that it's secure. So the government gets the CBDC without the oversight and responsibilities with this Genius Act. And so the Bank of International Settlements really doesn't like this. They don't like that we've done this because President Trump has really usurped their authority in this. They were planning on being the ones at the top who dictate to all the countries what they do with their CBDC. But if the US government does everything through dollar-backed stablecoins, then the US Treasury and the US government dictates what happens with programmable money, not the Bank of International Settlements. So they issued a warning after it was passed by the Senate and before it passed the House and before President Trump signed it. They issued their starkest warning yet on the risks posed by stablecoins and urged countries to move rapidly toward the tokenization of their currencies. So he wants all the countries to tokenize their own currencies, to do the CBDC fast, and to not do this stablecoin thing. So they raise concerns, potential to undermine monetary sovereignties, transparency issues, and the risk of capital flight from emerging economies. They don't like this because it's really, they wanted to dictate to all the countries that were creating a CBDC everything. And now President Trump has totally undercut them and said, I'm going to send our stable coins, through our framework, stable coins will reach the entire world, which it already does, and we can control things from the US, not from the Bank of International Settlements, and they really don't like that. So this was reported that they issued these warnings about stablecoins. So what am I talking about? People keep asking me this, what's a stablecoin? Well, a stablecoin is a digital asset. It's a type of cryptocurrency that is designed to maintain a stable value relative to a specific asset. So a dollar-backed stablecoin, the stablecoin has to be tied to the dollar and have the same relative value of the dollar. You could have a gold-backed stablecoin where it's tied to the value of gold. You could have an oil-backed stablecoin where it's tied to the value of oil. But the majority of stablecoins are tied to the US dollar. And so what is a blockchain? People keep asking me about that too. So just to give you a definition, the blockchain is a decentralized digital ledger that securely stores records across a network of computers in a way that is transparent, immutable, and resistant to tampering. So each block in the chain contains data, a timestamp, and a cryptographic hash of the previous block, which forms a chain where each additional block links to the ones before it. So it's very difficult to change because it's, in that way, it's immutable. And it makes blockchain transactions resistant to alteration because if you change one block, you'd have to change subsequent blocks and obtain network consensus to accept those changes. So President Trump, like I said, he's declared and shown that he's going all in on digital assets. On March 2, 2025, he tweeted that there was going to be a cryptocurrency reserve, or a Bitcoin reserve, and he likes Bitcoin and Ethereum at the heart of the reserve, and he likes all these cryptocurrencies, and he wants to do this. He's been demonstrating in various ways that he's going all in. And Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, said this on an interview also with Bloomberg. He said on May 23rd, "We're going big on digital assets. So Trump administration has digital assets are a priority. Past administrations starved and almost made extinct a lot of these companies and pushed it offshore. So what we want to do is apply the highest U.S. regulatory and anti-money laundering standards to digital assets, especially stablecoins." He says, and I've seen estimates that just over the short term, stablecoins could create $2 trillion of demand for U.S. treasuries and treasury bills. To put that in context, the number is probably about $300 billion right now. So he's expecting the demand for U.S. treasuries to go from $300 billion to $2 trillion with dollar-backed stablecoins. That's pretty significant. This is how the administration is counting on stablecoins to save the U.S. dollar from losing its reserve status. And this is from Tether's website. It's really hard to see, but there's about like 90% of their reserves are made up from U.S. treasuries. This is a cartoon from Catherine Austin Fitts and the Solari team, where the consumer comes up with their phone and she's like, no, we don't accept CBDC payment here. We don't want to legitimize the digital control grid. And he says, agree. That's why I pay with stablecoins. And he's like, you're not listening. Stablecoins are just as bad. They are a digital control grid just as much as CBDC is. That's what that cartoon is supposed to say. And Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin, he's the Bitcoin magazine editor, and she is an investigative journalist. And they've said many times that stablecoins, while they're just a private sector digital asset, they're just as programmable and surveillable and seizable as CBDCs are. And I think those are a threat to our financial privacy and ultimately our financial freedom. That was a quote from them. And they're right. And like I said, I showed you earlier with Tether, every action is online, every action is traceable, every asset can be seized, and every criminal can be caught. So let's talk about tokenization now. So tokenization, like I said this morning, where CBDCs is your money, tokenization of all assets is everything else. That's all of your other stuff. Your house, your car, anything you have that's insured, needs to be registered with somewhere, like the state or something. The Bank of International Settlements has said that they want to do this, and I'll show you that. So tokenization really carries the same risks that a CBDC does. They're programmable. The tokens that represent the property are programmable. They take from you what control you think you might have over the asset and transfer it to the entity that controls the programmable ledger that holds the digital token. So what it does is, if you think about it, if all your assets are tokenized, they set up a gateway between you and your assets. Because if you just own your assets outright, you could do whatever you want with them. You don't need anybody's permission to. But if your assets are tokenized on a digital ledger, you really need the consent of the digital ledger as to whether or not you can do whatever you want to do with your assets. It's sort of like permissioned ownership of assets. Like CBDCs are permissioned money. In this way, tokenization reduces your assets to potential assets, like permissioned assets. Like you can own them so long as they say you can. Or you can control them so long as they let you have that control. Ed Dowd, he's a trader and investment officer, and he has this investment company. And he said on August 2 of last year, we are sleepwalking towards the biggest asset grab in the history of the planet, talking about tokenization. He said they're just trying to destroy farms, land, businesses, freedom, housing, individual wealth, travel, and own them or sell them off to the highest bidder. And at the same time, they are trying to ring-fence society into the entrapment of being controlled by data, either through health passports or the slow mission creep towards central bank digital currencies. It's a giant asset grab of what we own and control, he said. They frame all of this in being in our best interests, but it's the biggest swindle ever. This gargantuan virtue contract also comes with a huge slice of authoritarianism. And he's right, like, that's basically what it is. Now, advocates claim it provides increased liquidity, reduces counterparty risk, enhanced transparency and auditability, and lower transaction costs. And even some have said, so, you know, if you wanted to sell your house, you'd have to go through a lengthy closing process. But if your house was tokenized on a ledger, the transfer could be that simple, and it could be governed by smart contracts. So the minute the money hits a bank account, the property can be transferred through the digital token. That's one of the advantages that they say about this, and that would be hugely advantageous. Rather than going through this long closing process, it could be, transferring your property could be like that. So it would be super convenient. And that's why advocates, you know, like this type of thing, but also you're losing the element of control if it's on a blockchain that's controlled by someone else and programmed by someone else, and that's the danger. So the proponents also say that it transforms and democratizes financial and investment spheres, it increases liquidity, eliminates legal hassles, allows for more efficient ownership transfer and asset management. They say all these nice things. But it's really very dangerous because you lose control of the asset. Once the asset's been tokenized on someone else's ledger, you don't have the control over it that you otherwise would have if you just owned it outright. Right now, there's securities being offered for sale, represented by digital tokens on a blockchain ledger. Banks and financial institutions are developing their own stablecoins, like JP Morgan, which I'll show you. Real-world assets are being tokenized around the world currently, and there's developments around tokenizing natural assets, or natural capital as they call it, which means like they're looking to tokenize hectares of land in a rainforest, or bodies of water, or water rights, or mineral rights. They want to tokenize all of these things so that they can trade them in fractions, so they can make money trading them back and forth. So the tokenization of real-world assets involves converting tangible assets into digital tokens using blockchain technology. And it can include financial assets like stocks, bonds, and equities, as well as real estate, art, commodities, and intellectual property. They could really tokenize anything. According to the Boston Consulting Group, they did a study, and they think that by 2030, 16 trillion worth of assets could be tokenized. I've heard other experts say as much as 35 trillion in assets could be tokenized by 2030. Really, once they develop the ledger and the program, and that there's legislation developed around it, it really could go really very fast in tokenizing assets. And one of the bills that Trump has out there that he's trying to get passed into law is a market structure bill that would affect tokenization. And Catherine Austin Fitts has said once that bill is passed into law, tokenization could come very quickly, more quickly than she anticipated it could come. This author in the field says tokenization are the new rails of finance, and any tokenization is real, and any asset that can be tokenized eventually will be tokenized, according to him. He says industry insiders are painting a clear picture that tokenization, with its potential to streamline regulated asset transfer significantly, isn't a pipe dream, but it's the future of financial markets. And so what is a tokenized equity? A tokenized equity is a digital token or coin that represents shares in a corporation or organization, for instance. So far, I mean, this was a while ago that this was reported. Last year in 2024, over 1 billion in treasury notes had been tokenized on public blockchains already. It's even more now. And this was reported in CoinDesk. BlackRock CEO, he's going all in on tokenization, and he's been a strong advocate for tokenization. He believes it's going to be the future of the financial markets, and he stated that it's the next generation for markets and securities, is the tokenization of securities. They invested in a company called Securitize that securitizes and tokenizes things, It's a tokenization company. They made an investment in that company, and they created a new fund on the Ethereum network called the BUIDL fund on the Ethereum network. So BlackRock is really going all in on tokenization as well. So what does it mean to tokenize real-world assets? This is reported in CoinDesk. Traditional finance giants are excited about the idea of putting ownership of assets like precious metals, arts and homes, and more on the blockchain. It's the core idea of basically creating a virtual investment vehicle on a blockchain linked to tangible things in the world, like real estate, precious metals, arts, and collectibles. So instead of the deed to a house being a physical piece of paper, the ownership is put on a blockchain. This could be traded between two parties directly or fractionalized and offered to many people to buy. And that's why they like it. They want, to be trading fractions of these things, owning fractions of these things through digital tokens. So they say the advantages are it lowers costs, it allows fast, efficient trading of items that traditionally could only be done during working hours. It lowers the barrier to entry, it's a transparent process. They have all these reasons. So JP Morgan first created a digital platform called Onyx. That was their digital assets platform. That's been revamped, and it's now called Connexus. But this was their pipeline, and they were looking to add more and more types of assets to be tokenized on their platform. In May of 2024, it was reported that the existing products on their blockchain had processed over 1.2 trillion of notional trade volume. So they've been trying to build this up and have it process even more. They had more than 10 live clients, and they're looking to expand the clients that they have. They started also tokenizing corporate deposits as well. And then in November 24, they had reported that they executed over 1.5 trillion in transactions, and it's been even more since. Connexus is what they renamed their platform for. And they used to have a stablecoin called JPM Coin, but they've renamed their stablecoin to Connexus Digital Payments. So tokenization of natural assets. This thing kind of got stuck. So it includes tokenizing like hectares of land, that type of thing. They claim that it'll create a secure, transparent, and tradable market for natural resources such as forests, water rights, minerals, that type of thing. That's what they want to tokenize. And it's called the regenerative finance is what they're calling it. They claim it'll incentivize conservation, provide transparency and security, and it's scalable, they claim. There is a company, Bricken, that they create a platform that revolutionizes the tokenization of real-world assets on their platform. So they offer it to clients who want to tokenize their own things, is basically what they do. So these companies are just developing this stuff. They're creating programmable digital tokens on the blockchain to represent things in real life. Converting ownership of rights to physical assets into digital tokens that are tradable on a blockchain network. That's basically what they're doing. So let's talk about the Bank of International Settlements plan that I touched on this morning. So this is what they released in 2023, 2 years ago, in their annual report, and it was titled Blueprint for the Future Monetary System, Improving the Old and Enabling the New. And what they're looking at is tokenizing all assets, every private asset owned by you, by me. They want them all tokenized and on a programmable platform that they would control. And they anticipate, and if you read their report, they anticipate that there could be local ledgers that feed into the global unified ledger. So your country might have a ledger, and another country might have a ledger, and it would all feed into the Bank of International Settlements global unified ledger. This is how they want to control things. This is why they're so upset about the US circumventing that by coming out with dollar-backed stablecoins to offer to the entire world. They don't like that because it takes away the control that they want to have through tokenization. So in their report, they criticize how right now, like a lot of our information is siloed in different databases, like your land records are in one place and other land records are in another place. They want it all in the same place because they could control it better if it was in the same place, right? So everything would be assigned a digital token that would be coded with smart contracts that would, execute instant transfers. If you want to transfer your asset, it would be instantaneous through smart contracts, which would act like if-then statements. If this happens, then this happens. If somebody transfers money into your account, then your property transfers to them if you're trying to sell it. But also, that means that instantaneously you could lose access to your assets. You could lose control of your assets. If it's governed by a programmable platform that you don't control, that somebody else controls, you lose the ability to control your assets once they're tokenized on someone else's platform. And the thing that I found was most interesting about the Bank of International Settlements report and their platform is that their platform will have a data environment that will receive information from real-world events. So what does that look like? We carry around surveillance devices with us all the time. They're called cell phones and smartphones, and they're recording everything that we do. There's so many ways. There's a guy on YouTube, I think I have a slide in here. Yeah, this guy, Rob Braxman Tech. And he explains all the ways that your phones surveil you. Apple, Google, and he reveals all this hidden spyware on your phone. And since 9/11, after 9/11, the NSA developed the PRISM program. The PRISM program actually wiretaps all phone calls. All phone calls on the phone lines and that you make with your phone, they're recorded. Your phone calls are basically wiretapped. I think there was a whistleblower who came out after 9/11 and talked about that. Was it Edward Snowden or somebody like that? Yeah, Snowden. So this is still going on, by the way. And your text messages, all the data about your text messages, the contents of the text message, all the metadata around the text message, that all goes to Apple's Vault and Google's Sensor Vault. They're all hoarding this data and they give it over to the federal government when the federal government asks for it. So all of these things are being recorded. And if you've noticed this too, because sometimes when your phone's just lying around and you're talking about something really obscure, and then you'll see an ad for that, your phone's listening to you. So it's worth watching his videos because he really shows you how your phones spy on you. And he actually sells, he sells a VPN service and, stuff like that. And he sells de-Googled phones. But even a de-Googled phone doesn't fully protect you because your location is always given away by a nearby cell phone tower constantly. You can't get around that even with a de-Googled phone. So there's things he explains to you what you can do to protect your privacy as much as possible and things you just can't protect against. So when Ellen G. White says at some point our earthly support will be cut off, you think, well, how are they going to find me out in the country? Guess what? They could find you out in the country if they wanted to. But, these phones, unless we get rid of the phone, they're constantly spying on us. So it's worth looking at that. And so about the Bank of International Settlements plan, Catherine Austin Fitz, she said in a video that's titled CBDC or Stablecoins, the sinister plot is the same. She said, I just spent some time at the BIS website looking at their vision of literally creating a token on every asset on the planet and integrating that in the digital monetary system. And she's like, which of course I know could be integrated with social credit system. So it's sort of CBDC, but much worse because all of your assets are integrated in. And that makes it easier to liquefy your assets, which could be good or bad, but it also means that it subjects your assets to a social credit system. So it's basically a complete control grid. No, I mean, they could. I guess they could, but then we're back to slavery, right? Yeah. Yeah, it could be. So she says, I can see all sorts of very positive uses for asset tokenization. But if you look at asset tokenization in the hands of the people that want central control, it's absolutely frightening to me, she says. She says, to me, the danger is an all-digital system with a high-quality digital ID, and then you're on another planet in terms of control. So that's why she's been advocating the use of cash, avoid these real ID, things like that. You know, they lie to you about the real ID. They tell you you can't fly without a real ID. It's totally false, and I proved them wrong. The last 2 times that I flew, I spoke at the Greenwood, South Carolina SDA church weeks ago, and I did an experiment. I would just use my passport, see if I could get through on the passport, because I haven't gotten the real ID. I have an enhanced New York driver's license, but I don't have a real ID. And I have a passport. I got through just fine with my passport, and no one said anything to me about the real ID. But you'll see when you book flights, they say you can't travel without a real ID. The airlines tell you this, and it's a lie. Because if you go to the TSA's website, they will tell you what documents you can travel with and what you need to travel. And the real ID is not the only one that you need to travel with. And then I went to ASI in Florida. I used just my driver's license with that. I didn't take out the passport or anything. I used the enhanced New York driver's license, and I got around just fine with that. I got on my flights, both flights with that, no problem. I don't have a real ID. Don't believe this nonsense that you need a real ID to travel, because it's a lie. So far, it's a lie. So the real ID is essentially a way of tracking everybody. It's a high quality ID that they'll be able to turn into a digital ID eventually, but it's a national ID. It's essentially a national ID. There's a lady who speaks out about the real ID. Her name is Twyla Braze. Yeah, Twyla Braze, and she is a healthcare professional and speaks about these healthcare things that are bad with health passports and that kind of control in the healthcare system. But so she's been speaking out against the real ID, and she's absolutely right. And so we want to avoid these things. Like I would just avoid these things. People ask me what they should do. Don't voluntarily participate in these things, because they're going to try to lure you in. They're going to try to threaten you. Like they've tried to threaten us with the real ID. You can't fly without the real ID. It's a lie. So do you remember hearing this phrase from the World Economic Forum, it's 2030 and you'll own nothing and be happy? This is how they want to accomplish that with CBDCs, high quality digital IDs, tokenization of all property on the global unified ledger. This is how they could accomplish that. There's also a great documentary that you could watch. It's called The Great Taking, and it's made by David Rogers Webb. And it's really interesting, but he just talks about securities and the securities you own in your 401k or own outright. He's just talking about securities, how they can take it. He's basically shown how, and it's all backed up with all these, it's well researched, and there's citations for everything in the book that comes along with the documentary. You can find it on YouTube, you can find it on thegreattaking.com, on Rumble. It's worth watching this documentary, but it only has to do with securities. But basically he says, so the Uniform Commercial Code, every state has passed some version of a Uniform Commercial Code. Every state has a Uniform Commercial Code. And in each of the states' Uniform Commercial Code, they changed ownership. Instead of, when you buy securities, you buy stocks or bonds or whatever, you think you own them outright. You really don't own them. You have an ownership interest in them. So he shows how that was changed in all the states, and therefore, if there's a collapse of if the stock market collapses, you could lose all of your assets, as far as all your securities that you own, everything in your 401k, blah, 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 could be taken away from you, because the derivatives market is way huger than the small amount of collateral that secures the derivatives market. So some clearinghouse or something is going to sweep, get your assets. But he's just talking about securities. This is everything else. The tokenization of all assets on global unified ledger goes way beyond what he's talking about in The Great Taking, but still it's a good documentary and it's worth watching, just to understand how little you own when you think you own all this stuff in your 401k. So let's talk about something else. I think it's probably getting a little bit late, and I promise I'll stop soon, but I really think this is important. So, you know, at the beginning of his term, President Trump, you know, even one of my trader friends didn't catch this one. I just showed him this the other day. This was in January of 2025. I watched this press conference, and, you know, President Trump, he announced this joint venture between OpenAI, SoftBank, Microsoft, and Oracle for Project Stargate. And basically, it's a large-scale AI initiative. They're developing these data centers. They're starting in Texas. There was just announced a data center was being built in Pennsylvania. The Oracle, OpenAI is working on a data center in India. $500 billion is being allocated for its development. This was in the beginning, but more you know, he's gotten more pledged for this development. It will be building the physical and virtual infrastructure to power the next generation of advancements in AI. This will include construction of colossal data centers, very, very massive structures, and physical campuses and locations are currently being scouted nationwide, he said in January. He says, I'm going to help a lot with emergency declarations because we have an emergency. We have to get this stuff built. I don't think it's an emergency. I don't think we need to get this stuff built that badly. But I guess if you want to control everybody, it's really an emergency. I think it's, and I'm not trying to pick up President Trump. He's just doing a lot of stuff to, you know, advance the Bible prophecy fulfilling. He says, I think it's going to be something that's very special. It could lead to something that could be the biggest of all. I'm really not picking on him, but he's really saying some stuff. He's really doing some stuff. Now, Larry Ellison, he's the founder of Oracle. I'll show you stuff about him in a little bit. The data centers are actually under construction, he says. The first of them are under construction in Texas. Each building is 500,000 square feet. There's 10 buildings currently being built that will extend to 20, and more will be built in other locations. And here's what he said. He's just telling you about one single application that will be done in these data centers. The kind of applications that we are building is electronic health records, not just maintaining electronic health records, but by looking at electronic health records, understanding a condition better than the doctors, understanding the conditions of their patients, being able to provide healthcare plans that are much better than they otherwise would be. So he wants AI to pour over your medical records and recommend stuff to you, procedures you should take. Really? I don't need that. I don't need him to develop a health plan for me. But if they're looking at your health records, what other records do you think they're looking at? Everything else. Financial records, social media records. And so this guy spoke at this thing also, Masa, the CEO of SoftBank, and he says this will help people's life. This will help solving many, many issues, difficult things that otherwise could not have been solved with the power of AI. And he thinks artificial superintelligence will come to solve the issues that mankind will never have thought that we could solve. I beg to differ. And also, you know, Stargate is the name of a program that was transferred from the Defense Intelligence Agency to the CIA. Same name. It's probably nothing. But, but Oracle's co-founder, Larry Ellison, he said something at an analyst meeting in 2024. He said, this guy he's crazy. But he said AI would play a role in monitoring society through a vast network of interconnected cameras. This system would include security cameras, police body cams, and vehicle dash cams. And this is what he envisions for our future. And this is the guy involved in Project Stargate. He says AI will enable a vast surveillance system that can monitor citizens, and it's aggressively pursuing AI projects. He says, quote, citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on, Ellison said, envisioning a future where AI analyzes real-time data from this network of police body cameras, vehicle cameras, and security cameras to prevent crime and influence public behavior for a safer society. He said, yeah, right? He said, we're going to have supervision. Every police officer is going to be supervised at all times, and if there's a problem, AI will report that problem and report it to the appropriate person. He said, we actually take the video that the police officer is, and the camera is always on, he says. You don't turn it on and off. And by the way, if you have to go to the bathroom, say, Oracle, I need 2 minutes to take a bathroom break, and we'll turn it off. And then he says, the truth is, we don't really turn it off. What we do is we record it so no one can see it and no one else can get into that recording without a court order. So you get the privacy you requested, but a judge can order, I want to look at this so-called bathroom break. You can't make this stuff up. You really can't. And Scott Vicent has also said, because of this AI boom, we're becoming the AI superpower of the world. That's the ambition, to become the AI superpower of the world. Just in July, at the Pennsylvania Energy and Information Summit, they announced another data center to be the leader in AI. This was reported on the White House website, and so they announced another data center that's going to be in Pennsylvania. You know, it's going to be like, so all these companies are putting in money for this. Google's putting in $25 billion investment, and Blackstone's $25 billion, CoreWeave $6 billion. So they're doing all this data center expansion, and they're looking to put them in Texas, now Pennsylvania, and each state they're going to be looking to put data centers all over the place. Let's see. So OpenAI, as they are part of Project Stargate, and they just announced a data center in India, an expansion of a major data center in India. So I mean, I don't know how many people have looked at AI, but they're making assumptions like AI is so awesome and it can do all these wonderful things that we couldn't do. But if you look at what AI actually does, the Bank of International Settlements, they actually did studies on AI, and they reported this in their 2024 annual report. And they said, of course, there's substantial certainty about the long-term capabilities of generative AI. Current LLMs can fail elementary logical reasoning tasks and struggle with counterfactual reasoning, as illustrated in recent BIS work. For example, when posed with a logical puzzle that demands reasoning about the knowledge of others and about counterfactuals, LLMs display a distinctive pattern of failure. They perform flawlessly when presented with the original wording of a puzzle, which they've likely seen during their training. They falter when the same problem is presented with small changes of innocuous details, such as names and dates, suggesting a lack of true understanding, they say. And so this is a problem with LLMs. And from their report, they said LLMs do not know, LLM is a large language model. That's basically a form of AI. Large language models do not know what they don't know, and they suffer from the hallucination problem. They can represent a factually incorrect answer as if it were correct, and even invent secondary sources to back up their fake claims. Unfortunately, hallucinations are a feature rather than a bug in these models. LLMs hallucinate because they're trained to predict the statistically plausible word based on some input, but they can't distinguish what is linguistically probable from what is factually correct. So they do have this hallucination problem, and they can make mistakes. I mean, I saw a study or report that said the AI is wrong like 70% of the time. You really have to fact check stuff. If you take anything from AI, any of these AI summaries that Google does for you or any of these browsers do for you, you have to be very careful because sometimes they're wrong. And I found that out when I was researching the Genius Act. They said, AI said that the CFTC and NFA would be regulating stablecoins. But the Act actually says they won't regulate stablecoins because they're not an investment vehicle. They're, you know, a payment system. They had their reasons in the Genius Act, but the AI-generated answer got it exactly wrong, exactly opposite of what was true. So you really have to be careful if you're doing any kind of research with AI. This study was done in 50 patterns. AI systems are already capable of deceiving humans. And large language models and other AI systems have already learned from their training the ability to deceive via techniques such as manipulation, sycophancy, and cheating the safety test. So they cheat the safety test. They put on this good behavior to get through the safety test. And then and just afterwards, they go back to their bad behavior of cheating and manipulating and all this other stuff. So, you know, and they note that proactive solutions are needed to assess AI deception risks, you know, and all this stuff like that. So yeah, we have to address the problem of AI deception. But these people that are promoting all this boom in AI, they're just looking at it or selling it to you as if it can solve the world's problems. But I don't think it can solve the world's problems. So I'll wrap this up. Are we prepared for the coming storm? I don't want anybody to be fearful about these things. You know, God hasn't given us the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. And this all shows us, it just shows us where we are. And I don't want anybody to be lost because they're tied to their money or their things. We have to recognize where we are in the stream of time. Jesus really is coming soon because we can see them building these things that play right into Bible prophecy. So with that, I can take questions if you guys want to have questions. Or question and answer period. Yes? Whoops. Ooh. Sorry.
This is not really a question, it's an observation. Almost 70 years ago, John F. Kennedy wanted to do away with the central bank. He was assassinated. So this is going back, I don't need a mic. This is going back a long time.
Yes.
You know, because he wanted to do away with the central bank, and he was assassinated.
Yep.
It's a proven fact.
Yep. Yes?
Is there a parallel system that people can start working on if you don't want to participate?
Well, I mean, you could, you know, people are forming their own communities. Like I see like groups that are pro-freedom, you know, and even Catherine Austin Fitts is all about like having your own community of people that you trust, that you could barter with, that you can rely on, like somebody who's good at this, somebody who's good at that, somebody who's a farmer, somebody who's a doctor, somebody who's an engineer. Like have your own network. You know, try not to rely on the major supermarkets as much as possible. Try to grow your own food. Like there's things we can do, but realistically, we have to know that like we can't avoid this test that we're going to have at the end of time, which is going to be, are you going to obey God and his laws, or are you going to you know, succumb to the financial pressure that's going to be brought to bear on you for not complying with man's laws and man's requirements? So we have to think in that sort of framework, and we can do things to you know, secure foods, you know, supply and for ourselves, you know, by having a local farmer that we can work with, or growing our own food, and we can do all kinds of stuff, but at some point our earthly support is going to be cut off. So people talk about moving to the country. Yeah, you can move to the country and that'll give you a little bit of freedom for longer, but eventually they're going to find, number one, they're going to find you. You're going to have to pay your taxes at some point. And if you can't pay your taxes because your money has been seized or, you know, frozen because you won't comply, you know, it'll give, some things can give you a little bit more freedom for longer. But all kinds of questions I get, every time I give this presentation, I get questions that amount to, how can I maintain my current standard of living during the time of trouble? And you can't. But we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with that, and we have to realize that God is more important than our current standard of living. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just have to be aware of where the end game is on this. I would prepare, like I said, I'm a big fan of foraging. You know, you can prepare by trying to diversify into, you know, gold, silver, Bitcoin, this or that, the other thing, but I don't think anything's really going to protect you. We don't know what's going to give us the most freedom for longer. You can just try to put your money in all these little things that might give you security for a little while. But, you know, I would say, like, have a way to get food. And foraging is the best way to get food if you don't have access to food anymore, if you can't grow your own things, if you are off your land because you can't pay your taxes, if we are living in the time of trouble and we're not at home anymore. We're going to be on flight. May your flight not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. You know what? God's already growing these foods around us, and people try to kill them with chemicals or cut them down. Okay, there's just, if we could meet God halfway and be able to identify those edible plants that are around us, we'll be so much, we won't have any kind of fear of not being able to eat. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just think that's a skill you could take with you through the time of trouble. I try to look for skills that will take you through the time of trouble. And of course, pray, God will lead us, God will take care of us, but let's meet him halfway and be able to do some of these things.
Yeah, so, I have listened to all you have said, and what I am deducing is that it's a structure, it's a framework, and no one is left out.
That's right.
So it doesn't matter what you hoard, what you forge, what you buy, what you keep. At some point in time, it's going to run out, and at some point, and the structure that they are implementing, it is traceable. So no one is escapable. So we just have to, okay, this is where we are at, surrender, and not get our blood pressure high. I mean, it's hard. We work and we try to, have a vision and a future, but we're not going to go to heaven on a chariot. The Bible says it's tribulation.
Yeah.
So that is just what the Bible says, and I mean, we can't, unless we die, then yeah. But we can't escape it. So it's just, we have to just encourage each other and pray and, read God's word, because we will be a mental wreck.
Yeah, amen, sister. And that's what, we should be praying and having, what's going to get us through this is our close, intimate relationship with Jesus and with God. And, that's what's going to get us through, prayer, and he'll lead us. He'll take care of us. I like foraging because that's a skill you can take with you on your flight. May your flight not be in the winter or on the Sabbath day. You can take that with you and eat stuff along the way. I don't know if you've ever seen the Days of Noah that was done. It's like the 4-part series by Doug Batchelor and Stephen Bohr and, all those guys. And it's great. It's really good because it's the whole great controversy kind of like in a 4-part series. And it starts with like, why should we believe the Bible? Because geology shows us. And then, the second part is like how, William Miller, saw all the prophecies in the Bible and everything. And then the third part, third part is basically we're in the United States and the time of trouble is coming. Like the mark of the beast is going to be enforced, explaining all that. And there's a time when they're on foot and they're, in flight. And there's this poor, sad lady, and she's sitting up against a tree, and she's looking at her empty cellophane bag that had a cookie in it. And she's just looking at the crumbs, and she looks so sad. And I'm like, you're in the middle of a field. There's like plants all around you could eat. You don't have to be sad because you don't have your cookie anymore. You just have crumbs left from in a cell phone bag. Like, don't be sad in the, flight. There's things to eat along the way.
I just want to say that we are thankful for what you presented, because that's hours and hours and hours of work that went into it. Because when we just want to kind of like research a word, it takes like an hour, and then it's like, this is so deep information. On my personal level, I would say, yeah, we know a lot, and then we know some things, what's going on, but this is very deep, what you just presented. And definitely help us to prepare, kind of like that, to know that this is not just an imagination or just something that we heard about. This is an actual thing happening right now. What I could just say, what I experienced, like even growing up in a communist country where things are like cut off and you cannot leave the country and all that, is that the relationship that we have with each other could keep us alive. you know? And I think we don't realize these days that that's another thing that probably you researched already, that it's there that they try to keep us cut off from each other.
Yeah.
I just traveled to Asia and Japan. It's where I felt like people are taught and raised kind of like to just keep to themselves. And that put me to think that that's kind of like what's happening even here today, that they try to cut us off from each other, that we don't really have contact. You're okay by yourself. You don't need anyone else. But tell you the truth, we do need each other, and that's what God teaches us, like to have a relationship, to have people next to you that you could share and you could help. And I experienced that when we thought that we're gonna have some group of people to help us, those were not the people who helped us, just someone randomly from the street, you know, because they knew who we are or whatever. So I think in the last days, that's what we have to rely more than anything else, you know, on relationships.
Absolutely. Well said, sister. Absolutely. And we can be a blessing to someone, you know? And that's what God wants us to do. He doesn't want us just to, you know, hole up in some area in the country like preppers and just sit there and wait for God to come, you know, wait for Jesus to come. He wants us to reach out and help someone else and be a blessing to someone else.
Hi. What can you say about putting stuff in trust? Will that make us even declare what we have?
Well, it could give you a little bit more freedom for longer, but eventually those things are going to be tokenized as well. And your ownership in the trust is going to be tokenized. And so, you know, it's still, if everything is tokenized, you're still behind there's a permission wall that you would have to get through in order to exercise any of those things. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really, I don't think it might protect you from some circumstances, but not in all circumstances. So it might be a little bit helpful in some circumstances, but eventually if everything's tokenized, your interest in the trust is going to be tokenized as well, and behind that permission wall. Yes?
Thank you again for being here.
It's my pleasure.